BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. And I am your host, Box Ned. Most of the time on Zodiac Monday, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac in the form of a show called the Zodiac Killer News Report. But this episode is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be discussing the book The Zodiac, Murderers and Histories, Ciphers and Crimes by C.G. Karras. And sometimes I'll be referring to him as C.G. Karras and other times Carl Karras. This is a very interesting book because it covers many different parts of the Zodiac Killer case. There are suspects that are mentioned in the book, and some people approach the Zodiac Killer mystery simply by stating, "Who is your suspect? Who do you think the killer was?" And this, if that's your intention, I don't know if you would truly want to read this type of book, but if you are curious about looking into the different aspects of the Zodiac Killer mystery, I definitely think that this would be a book for you. And I'm going to be very honest with you guys. This is not going to be a traditional book review. This is a book discussion where I'm simply pulling out some ideas from the book and discussing them. And some of them will also be worked in to future episodes of Zodiac Monday. And as far as the observations that have been made by C.G. Karras, he does have suspects, and he talks about them in the book, but I think that his observations on the Zodiac Killer's letters and ciphers really stand out well beyond that in my mind. And one of them starts with the 340 cipher, and there's a very long explanation about some hidden meanings in the 340 cipher, but I simply want to point out that the Zodiac Killer mailed the 340 cipher after the murder of Paul Stine, his final confirmed victim, and even Kelly Marshall, another Zodiac sleuth, pointed out that the 340 cipher is a cryptogram that was mailed by the Zodiac Killer, and it has two lines that are inserted in a very peculiar way, almost as if they are done intentionally, where you're supposed to split the cipher in half. And this is something that Kelly Marshall thought was meant where you're supposed to kind of combine the 408 cipher, the Zodiac Killer's first cryptogram, and the 340 cipher, and then you're supposed to turn it, and it reveals a message. But what Carl Karras is talking about is, if you look at those lines, they actually could be minus signs, and then there is a plus sign in the middle. And this might show that the Zodiac Killer was inserting an enormous amount of clues into his creations, and that he isn't just doing things in an arbitrary way. He isn't just doing things in a way that is just practical. These things might have personal meaning to him, and there are countless pages in this book by Carl Karras called The Zodiac, Murderers and Histories, Ciphers and Crimes that talk about the 340 cipher. He has lots of observations, but in all fairness to him, I want to leave some things for the reader, and you guys can get this on Amazon.com if you want to read the entire presentation. But there's a different Zodiac Killer letter that was mailed much after the 340 cipher, and this was the Exorcist letter, which was mailed in 1974. And Carl Karras also has a lot of observations about this one that are discussed in the book. And the Exorcist letter, firstly, it talks about some of the dry humor that the Zodiac Killer might be using. Exorcist has a first syllable that sounds like the letter X, that practically is the letter X. And that means that you can draw two lines on the page to create the letter X. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, you can do that with any piece of paper. You can do that with any piece of monarch-sized stationery. You can bisect a rectangle in two ways and make the X shape, right? Well, also, there are three letters that stand out in the middle of this letter that are very similar to the letter A. And there are different combinations of the letter A, and then a line can be drawn down, and that almost is making a type of inverted peace sign or a modified peace sign. So this goes to show that the Zodiac may have his particular clues. I mean, I think the observation about the 340 cipher and the plus and minuses is spot on and borderline irrefutable. This observation about the Exorcist letter is one that, I mean, it's possible that that's what the Zodiac Killer was intending, to find this type of peace sign, because the Exorcist letter is one that was one of the final Zodiac communications, and it might even be the last Zodiac letter, although I have a lot of suspicions about some ones that came later. But the Exorcist letter says something to the effect of, I saw and think The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy ever. Signed, yours truly. He plunged himself into the billowy wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Titwillow, Titwillow, Titwillow. P.S. Please print this message in your paper. If you don't, I will do something nasty, which you know I'm capable of. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what's discussed in the Exorcist letter. So to draw a peace sign in this letter that's threatening to not only talk about, well, commit suicide, but to kill other people or to do something nasty, which most people believe he was talking about murder, because the Zodiac was indeed a serial killer. That all just seems to fit together. So as you see, I mean, I'm ranking the observations on a different spectrum. This is possible. I think the thing about the 340 is absolutely solid. But there is one point where Carl Karras is discussing the Exorcist letter in his book, and he points out to something that I've mentioned multiple times on Black Box Online Radio in the past. And that is the word grave. Even if you go back to the old Black Box recordings and you hear me reading the Exorcist letter, he plunged himself into the billowy wave and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. When I was reading that for the first time, the second time, the 10th time, I read it as the word grove. And it's quite possible that he could be reading, the Zodiac could have actually intended that to be the word grove. And I mean, I've thought about this. It looks like the word grove. It's definitely written that, like, but I mean, I kid thee not. Like, if you listen to my old recordings, you'll hear me saying, and he plunged himself into the billowy wave and an echo arose from the suicide's grove. So I'm just glad that Carl has also found that similar type of observation. And again, I don't want to give away everything from his book, but I am just going to read a very specific section that says, there's a place north of Riverside, California called High Grove. High Grove, just north of Riverside, fits the bill, but other groves in the vicinity may have also had significance for him. If he was from High Grove, as it was sometimes called, we might be able to uncover the Zodiac's identity, as it is a small place to search. It was built around a railroad stop for freight passengers, and the passenger service was by the Santa Fe Railroad, and that ended on May 1st of 1971, around the time that the Zodiac paused his letter mailings. And as I said, the Exorcist letter was mailed in 74. But this thing about Riverside, California, that is the site of a possible Zodiac killer victim, and that is Sherry Jo Bates. The murder of Sherry Jo Bates occurred on October 30th of 1966. And could Grove be a reference to High Grove, California? At the very least, I think that that is something where we can get curious about these things. Now, as you guys know, I am not convinced that Sherry Jo Bates was murdered by the Zodiac Killer, but it appears that Carl Karras is looking heavily into her case. And I also want to point out that there are other letters and ciphers and codes that are discussed in this book, and one of them is the Peek Through the Pines card, which was mailed not after the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, but after the murder and abduction of Donna Lass, which occurred on September 6 of 1970. And then Carl also proposes in the book that there could be clues that are inserted into this card and that are revealing certain things about the Zodiac Killer's identity and observations, and that you might be able to draw certain symbols on this or find certain symbols on this that would indicate two particular things. Number one, that maybe the Zodiac Killer was an Aries, but also that there is a type of location that might be hinted at, which is going to show where the body of Donna Lass might have been buried, because Donna Lass's skull was found in 1986. She was working at the Sahara Tahoe hotel and casino, and she was abducted on September 6th of 1970, and she was murdered. Her remains were found in 1986, but that was only her skull, and she wasn't identified until 2023. And then maybe more of her remains are hinted at with the mailing of the Pines card in 1971. So this is something that I think is definitely influenced by other researchers out there, and the two ones that come to mind are Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com, who has just made an enormous amount of observations about the Pines card, and Lyndon Lafferty, who wrote the book The Zodiac Killer Cover-Up, also known as The Silenced Badge. And that one talks about how he believes that the Zodiac was an Aries, and that he also inserted an Aries symbol into a different cryptogram that he created, the Z13 cipher. But there are just really some good food for thought in this book, good pieces of food for thought in this book when you're talking about the letters and the ciphers and the cards. But one of the things that I think is my absolute favorite part of this book by Carl Karras is his discussion on the Zodiac Killer symbol. And this relates to something called the Death Wheel. In 1970, the Zodiac Killer mailed the Halloween card, and the Halloween card contained the language, by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. And what Carl has done is he has drawn the Zodiac Killer symbol on top of a location that the Zodiac referenced in another letter, Mount Diablo. And this is one where you can see that if it's drawn in a certain way, at a particular angle, you can get all of the Zodiac Killer's crimes that were committed by gun within the crosshairs. And the crosshairs resembles what? The scope of a gun. It resembles the gun sight. It resembles the way that someone would look through the telescope lens when they're trying to shoot a rifle, or perhaps even a different type of firearm. So those crimes can fit within the circle, and then the crimes that could be committed by knife or by fire would happen outside of the circle. Crimes committed by knife, like the Lake Berryessa stabbing, which saw the death of Cecilia Shepard and the stabbing of Brian Hartnell, and the crime committed by fire, the Kathleen Johns incident, which was an attempted abduction that occurred on March 22nd of 1970. So when you look at that, this is also just a really interesting observation. I can't certify it because I can't be like, this is exactly what the Zodiac Killer was saying. Aha, it's brilliant. It makes sense to me. Therefore, it's the truth. But this is also something that, I just think that it's a really good idea, and it's one of my absolute favorite parts of the book. And another one of my favorite parts of the book relates to the Halloween card as well, because this set of words, by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire, has mostly been traced back to a comic book, and giving credit to Tahoe 27, the researcher who made this possible discovery, that there was a comic book from the Tim Holt series that featured Tim Holt playing the Red Mask character, and there's another female character named Lady Doom who is spinning something called the Death Wheel, and the Death Wheel is supposed to land on by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire, and then there's another one that's actually concealed. But this goes back to a larger literary form of someone called the Lady of Situations. I talk about this a lot on Black Box Online Radio, but the material that I've never discussed before relates to how this could be a reference to something called Saint Catherine's Wheel, and all of this is in Carl Karras' book. And again, I want to read something from his book, again, just citing this as a reference, and it says, Saint Catherine's Wheel. Back to the start then. The church was named for an early Christian saint who was martyred by torture on the wheel, which meant having bones broken. She refused to succumb and was so beheaded, as supposedly. Already there seem to be parallels to the crime. Catherine is often depicted as holding the wheel or seated beside it. In the most famous image of her, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, which is featured in an Italian painting by the Baroque painter Caravaggio. Alright, so this could also be about how the Zodiac Killer is trying to create these crimes because of a torturous reason. Yes, it is a reference to the Tim Holt comics and the Death Wheel, but it could also be a reference to the Wheel of St. Catherine, or at the very least, some type of reason why the Zodiac Killer was thinking about this. But I absolutely think that that ties in very neatly with Slaves in Paradise. Now, you guys follow Black Box Online Radio for the Zodiac Killer case, of course, but there are a lot of other similar mysteries out there. One of them is the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, which occurred in 1946. And this is one where the perpetrator was very similar to the Zodiac Killer. There was a hooded serial killer that attacked couples that were parked in cars at lovers' lanes. The Zodiac Killer attacked couples that were either parked in cars or nearby cars at lovers' lanes, and they both wore hooded costumes at least one point. And the Texarkana Moonlight Murders are discussed in this book. But there's also another crime that is heavily, heavily connected to the world of the Zodiac Killer, and that is the Black Dahlia murder, which occurred in 1947. That's the murder of Elizabeth Short, who was not only murdered but also mutilated in a very surgical way. And one of the suspects that is discussed in this book is named Lawrence Kane. As I said, Carl Karras does have suspects, and he does explore them, and one of them is Lawrence Kane, who's a very famous Zodiac Killer suspect. Lawrence Kane was popularized because of the History Channel show The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, but he was also the suspect of an individual named Harvey Hines. And last week on Zodiac Monday, I was talking to you guys about the possibility of Lawrence Kane working with another Zodiac suspect like Arthur Lee Allen. Well, the other suspects that are discussed in this book are really, really coming at it in a different way. Not Arthur Lee Allen, but Xenophon Anthony, one whom I've mentioned before on the channel, and I have a standalone episode about him. Hugh Pend, who is discussed by Ray Grant in his book Zodiac Killer Solved, and an individual named Gio Cardanis. And perhaps I will do a much larger episode on him, as well as using some of the observations from Carl Karras' book here. But there is an entire section written in this book, The Zodiac, Murderers and Histories, Ciphers and Crimes, by Carl Karras, that is just called, Did Kane Know the Black Dahlia? Did Lawrence Kane know the Black Dahlia? Now, Lawrence Kane married a woman named Eileen Barton in New York in 1945, and she was a singing partner of Frank Sinatra. And then Lawrence Kane went west, and he was charged with battery in 1946 in Los Angeles. Elizabeth Short was murdered on January 14th or January 15th in 1947 in Los Angeles. And some additional facts of interest are that Kane was short and he was almost the same age. Kane and Short were almost the same age. It says Kane and Short, not Kane was short. Kane and Short were almost the same age, meaning that Lawrence Kane was born in 1924, and we know this because of the Z13 cipher, which had 3 8s in it. 8, 8, 8, 8 times 3 is 24, and that was one of the reasons why Harvey Hines thought that Lawrence Kane had created the Z13 cipher, because he was using that as a clue to his birth year. But some additional facts of interest. Kane and Short were almost the same age. Both were born in 1924 and on the 29th. Lawrence Kane was born in April and Elizabeth Short was born in July, and both were from the East. So, did Lawrence Kane know the Black Dahlia? Did he know Elizabeth Short? I mean, he's married to a woman who goes on to become a famous singer. Her name was Eileen Barton. She's a singing partner of Frank Sinatra. And this is something that is just so hard to grasp. This is one of the issues that I've had with Lawrence Kane as a Zodiac Killer suspect that is just very difficult to digest. He was sociable. He had social circles. He had connections to elite circles. And part of me is just looking at Kane as a suspect and thinking, where is this evidence? Where are the clues that point to somebody like this being the Zodiac Killer? Where does the Zodiac Killer show anything about being some type of sociable individual? Because some people think the Zodiac was simply a sad little man or a sad, lonely man, the type of serial killer who absolutely had no friends or family, or he was not close to anybody at all, or that he didn't have any strong circles of friends. He was somebody who went to work, had a solitary job, and then went home and sat by himself all day. But with the profile that's created for Lawrence Kane, he is in the absolute opposite direction. He is somebody who was not only married to a singing partner of Frank Sinatra, but he was someone who was spending an enormous amount of time in these social circles. He worked in real estate. He had interactions with countless people. He did not have a solitary job, what it sounds like. It sounds like he had a very outgoing and extroverted life. And this is something where, I mean, it's hard to comprehend, because when you think about the Zodiac, you think about someone who's just going to be sitting in his room all the time, thinking about the next letter, thinking about the next cipher, thinking about the next greeting card, and that's it. Like, that's just what comes to mind. But it's entirely possible that the Zodiac was someone different. And Carl Karras is even going to discuss different possibilities and how there could be different types of suspects and combinations of suspects and suspects working together. But I mean, this is even all discussed in a section in the book called Kane's Role, and I'm just going to look at some things that he has written out here. Towards the end of World War II, Lawrence Kane was doing his naval training near Chicago, and there was a film that may have influenced him called Charlie Chan at Treasure Island, out in the early 40s, and later he may have suggested to the group that its villain, whose name is Dr. Zodiac, be the name. And the group, as I said before, there are multiple suspects discussed, including Xenophone Anthony is another one, suspects working in tandem. Lawrence Kane had an accident in 1962 which left him with frontal lobe damage. A doctor stated that the injury left him with poor impulse control, and it's possible that he and someone named Joe K., that's Gio Cardenas, were working in Riverside at the time of Sherry Jo Bates' murder. Kane committed the attack, and his boss Joe covered for him. I haven't proved it, but I'll go on to show that there was a likelihood. The Z340 does seem to show a very personal bitterness toward Xenophone Anthony and a desire to see him take the fall for the Zodiac murders. If he was one of the conspirators, as I'm proposing, he may have been the weak link. But if Xene Anthony was not involved, except to have been identified by an 8-year-old witness at the scene of the murder of Paul Stein in California, in San Francisco, California, possibly doing nothing but walking by, an innocent bystander, then there are only a few alternatives left in the case. The Zodiac group would have to have included a member of law enforcement to have been aware of the witness interview, where Xene Anthony's name comes up in connection with Stein. He also would have had to have known Kane's movements and stalking of victims in proximity to several of the murders. He may have been trying to set up Lawrence Kane as a patsy as well, the prime patsy. The culmination of his efforts then would have been the abduction of Donna Lass from a Tahoe resort where Lass and Kane both worked, supposedly. And Lawrence Kane definitely worked at Donna Lass's place of employment, but we aren't 100% sure if that was in 1970 when she was abducted. Back to the book. When the Zodiac said he only looked like the sketch when he did his thing, perhaps because it's most of the time in public he was wearing a uniform. Failing that, he might have been a Jack Ruby-like character, hanging out with cops, getting all the gossip, and ready to kill at the appointed hour. And again, there are multiple suspects that are discussed in this book here, and I just wanted to share some things. And I am reading sections of his book only because I think that this presentation would only make sense by reading things and sharing some of the images. And if you're listening to this program on Spotify or Apple Podcasts under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast, I would invite you guys to go over to the YouTube version and have a look on things. But there is a discussion on the murder of Donna Lass in this book. This should also connect to the Halloween card, because I told you at the very beginning, the discussions on the letters and the ciphers and the cryptograms were things that really stood out to me. And we've already gone through St. Catherine's Wheel, and we've already gone through some of the symbolism and hidden messages of the Zodiac Killer. But Donna Lass was abducted on September 6th of 1970, and I told you about how some of her remains were found in 1986. And after September 6th of 1970, we have the mailing of the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card, which occurred on October 27th of 1970, so roughly a month and 3 weeks after the murder of Donna Lass, there is the mailing of the Halloween card. And the Halloween card contained a very peculiar symbol, a very bizarre symbol, and some people think that it's just a cattle brand that was used on the Red Ryder comic books, and other people think that maybe it was something from a motorcycle gang. But what Carl Karras is discussing in his book is that that symbol might also be a clue to where portions of Donna Lass's remains were buried. So we have the Pines card talking about Donna Lass, and we have the Halloween card talking about Donna Lass. And the Pines card and Halloween card are possibly going in absolutely different directions, but I think that this is an interesting way of tying it together with the Halloween card and the symbol. What Carl proposes in the book is you can take the flying V symbol and put it on Lake Tahoe. You can put it on Lake Tahoe, and you will have one arm going towards State Line, Nevada, from where Donna Lass was abducted, and the other arm of the flying V symbol is going to the west of Lake Tahoe, where Donna Lass's remains were found, or where her skull was found. So it's possible that her body was dismembered and her remains were found in different places, or it's just meant to mark and commemorate the location where Donna Lass was buried if her remains stayed in one place. So this is another very interesting symbol. And Carl also mentions multiple times in the book about how Donna Lass is somebody who was who had a very, very different type of name, because Donna means woman in Italian, and Lass, like even in the English language, Lass means a young lady, is particularly in Scotland. Lass or lassie can mean a young lady, and there could be a very specific reason why Donna Lass was chosen. But right now, I would just like to know what you think. Do you think that Donna Lass was a genuine Zodiac Killer victim? And do you believe that that symbol on the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card has a deeper meaning? A lot of people talk about how it can be connected to maps, and Carl is simply doing that in a different way. He is talking about how it's meant to be put on Lake Tahoe, or the Lake Tahoe region, and it's going to give more information about Donna Lass. What do you think is the secret meaning of the Zodiac Killer symbol on the Halloween card? And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out here on Zodiac Monday. And you can also use the super chats and super thanks here on YouTube. And the first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also been sharing a lot of resources that will be used for future episodes of Black Box Online Radio. So one more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with these true crime discussions. A lot of Zodiac Killer content will be coming out in a different direction, as well as talking about some of the different true crime stories that have taken place over the years. So thank you so much to Batman66 for that. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery, another regular and consistent supporter. River Prawn Pottery, thank you as well for sharing everything. And we have one from CZ Guy. CZ Guy has also become a regular and consistent supporter. You three guys are absolutely fantastic. And next we have one on buymeacoffee.com from Sam Fisher. Sam Fisher is the author of The Zodiac Killer Identity, and his Zodiac Killer suspect is named Joseph Paul Franklin. And Sam says, "Keep up the good work, Ned." Sam, thank you so much for that. And I mean, anybody who supports the channel on buymeacoffee.com or on the super thanks here on YouTube is greatly appreciated. But really, just feel free to listen to some of the content. Feel free to visit some of the older episodes. There are now more than 2,000 episodes of Black Box Online Radio. I don't know how that happened. That was just a shock to me that I woke up one morning and realized there were 2,000 episodes here on BBOR, and feel free to visit some of the other content that is available. And every Wednesday I talk to you guys about Jack the Ripper, and every Friday I talk to you about D.B. Cooper, Ripper Wednesday and Cooper Friday, in addition to Zodiac Monday. And there will be a new segment about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey starting soon on this channel. It is January at the time of this recording, but the JonBenet series will be starting in March of this year, and if you're listening to this at a future date, feel free to visit some of the content that I've made about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. And that will be all for me now. One more time, I invite you to read the Zodiac Killer book by C.G. Karras. And you guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. I am your host, Blackbox Ned, and you can find the shorts and reels that have been uploaded for this program on Facebook under my name, Ned DeHaan, or you can go to blackboxned88 on TikTok and Instagram. And that will be all for me now. Goodbye.